Yeah, today we're gonna take your action camera footage from looking like this to looking like this. Woo! Yeah, not bad at all. And the whole point is to make your action camera footage look as fast as it felt. And to make sure you get exactly what you want out of this video, I'm gonna break it down into 3 levels of difficulty so you can decide just how far down the rabbit hole you wanna go. But fortunately for everybody, including me, none of this is all that difficult. And by the way, I'm on a mountain bike right now. I'm gonna be using mountain bike examples because that's mostly what I do, but this applies for skiing and snowboarding and water sports and all that kind of stuff. And to start things off, I'm gonna cover something that I don't think most people consider, and I didn't even realize this was the case for years. Here is the main reason why things can feel so fast and adrenaline-filled in the moment, yet look so slow and boring when you're trying to impress your in-laws with the footage. So I'm simplifying a little bit here, but when we are going fast in real life, our brains feel that sense of speed mostly through our peripheral vision. So if I'm on my bike riding down a trail fast and I'm looking ahead to the part of the trail where I should be looking, that is not where we get our sense of speed from. The thing is about our vision is that, yeah, we are focused on this basically tiny little square downfield that way, but our eyes and our brains are still taking in absolutely everything around us. And our peripheral vision is set up to be super, super wide. Like I'm looking straight that way and I can see my hands till about there. And at the same time, I can also see the sky and my feet. Yeah, pretty wide. And because of parallax effect, things that are closer to you when you're going past them, they visually look like they're moving faster than something off in the distance. So despite you going one singular speed down the trail, things that are near you or moving past you and underneath of you, they appear to be moving really, really fast. Whereas, the trees down the way, they look like they're moving very slow in comparison. And I think the very, very best example, the craziest example I've ever seen of this is this video a person recorded on a train at different focal lengths. Look at this. A wide angle lens, and now you can see more of that peripheral. That's with more of a punched in lens, and keep in mind, this train is going the exact same speed. Yeah. So, if you want your footage to look faster, you're gonna need to include as much of the fast looking areas as humanly possible, while still at the same time making sure you're actually showing where you're going. Which brings us to level 1, camera placement. In general, and in most situations, not all of them, but most of them, the higher you mount your camera, the slower the footage is gonna look, simply because it's just getting too far away from that fast peripheral motion. But of course, on the flip side, if I were to record the whole ride with my camera scraping the ground off of like my fork or whatever, that might look cool for a few seconds of B-roll, but I don't think anybody wants to watch a full ride from that kind of camera perspective. So in general, I find a chest-mounted camera the ideal solution, especially for mountain biking, but a lot of other sport situations as well. And so I mount the camera on my chest and angle the camera down as far as I can get away with while still being able to see down trail. It's really kind of working that fine line between capturing as much of the ground and the sides as possible while still seeing where you're going. So with the chest-mounted setup or a really low chin-mounted setup, which is another option, I find it really hits that sweet spot with not only being able to see a lot of what's flying past you really close, but you can see down trail and you're also catching the action of your hands and your handlebars moving all around while you're flying down the trail. So without changing your camera or the camera settings or anything like that, just changing the camera placement and playing around with the up and down angle of it can make a really big difference for how much perceived speed there is in that video. Okay, on to level 2, where we are really gonna start turning the speed up. And we're gonna do that by adjusting the field of view or the lens of your action camera. And we're also gonna go ahead and fix the terrible audio that you're probably getting from your action camera while you're going really fast. So this is really simple. I wanna capture as much of that peripheral speed as I possibly can. So I wanna set my camera's lens as wide as possible without things getting too distorted. And there are different ways that different cameras go about making that happen. Single lens cameras like this Ace Pro and some other brands, they do some digital image manipulation tricks to squeeze in other parts of the image that you normally wouldn't see into a 16:9 aspect ratio. And some cameras go really, really far with it. Now, a dual lens 360 camera is pretty cool for getting a really, really wide field of view because it doesn't have to rely on those like squishy digital manipulation tricks. It's literally filming a 360 degrees field of view, but it doesn't have like the squishy weirdness on the edges that you can get with some other cameras. So I know me and a lot of other people who do a ton of POV filming really prefer those reframe 360 shots, even though it's more work after the fact. But yeah, there's pros and cons to both single lens and dual lens. So now we've moved the camera down and we've set up a much better lens and we've gone from this to this. things are looking pretty dang good and a lot faster than they were before. And now we're gonna dive into the second half of level 2, which has to do with audio. And audio is another huge way that your brain interprets how fast you're going, and it has to do with wind noise. Yeah, so I have a long-standing beef with action cameras and how they handle wind. There's probably been millions of hours of perfectly good action camera footage filmed out there that was ruined by auto wind functions. Now here's the thing, I used to think that my #1 goal with audio is to totally get rid of wind. And I actually achieved that a few years back. I was playing around with all these different little stick-on wind mufflers for my action cameras, and I pretty much cut out all of the wind. And when I did that, patted myself on the back, great job Ryan, and realized that I just ruined my footage in a totally different way. By actually getting rid of all the wind, it took out a major factor for representing speed in my footage. Like when you're standing around talking, you don't hear the wind whipping past your ears. But as soon as you start moving, there's actually a ton of wind noise. So our goal is to not get rid of the wind noise. That would be bad. We need to control it. So here's a regular camera setup with nothing over the mics, and I've got it set to wind reduction mode. Wind reduction on. No fluffies. Okay. How does my voice sound? Not going crazy fast or anything, but, you know, decent audible wind. Okay, so let's turn off wind reduction and put it into regular old stereo mode. Once I do that, I use these little stick-on wind mufflers to bring the wind noise down to where I want it to be. Listen to how much more clarity there is in the audio. Whoa, stick in this, folks. Okay. So now, because of my local trail conditions today, I wasn't able to actually go fast enough to induce proper wind noise. So here's another example of when I could. What a huge difference all that makes. Honestly, this is typically as far as I go on my usual shoots. But when I want things to look really wild, when I want it to look like Star Wars speeder level fast, well, I go to level 3. If you incorporate all 3 levels the next time you go and film, your footage is going to look crazy. Like crazy good. It's gonna look wild. You post that onto the gram, there's gonna be a lot of likes, okay? I'll just say that. And in level 3, we are talking about enhancing peripheral speed. And there are 2 ways to do that, and the first is motion blur. You experience the world with motion blur. You move your hand in front of your face, it's blurry. Go ahead, try it, I promise. It's a big part of how things can look natural. Like for me, when I'm watching a TV that's set to a really high refresh rate, I think it looks so brutally terrible, like absolutely awful, it makes me want to throw up, because it doesn't look natural. There's no natural motion blur to it. And that's also a big reason why I film in 24 frames per second, which is what you're seeing right now. There's some motion blur, whereas if I was filming in 120 or 60, there wouldn't be any motion blur, and it looks weird. Fight me on it. Anyways, in this scenario, blur is controlled by shutter speed in your camera. The faster the shutter speed is, the less motion blur, the more crisp frames that it's shooting. Whereas if the shutter speed is lower, especially below like 2/50th or 1/25th of a second, you're starting to introduce some motion blur. It really depends on how fast you're going, but in general, if it's below those 2 values, you're gonna start to get some nice motion blur out of it. And so you can actually go and set your shutter speed to be a consistent speed. But the tricky part is, your camera usually uses shutter speed to help with its auto exposure functionality. So if you're setting your shutter speed, it can often be way, way too bright or even too dark. So you do have to watch out for that. But if you set your shutter speed somewhere around 100th of a second, 125th of a second, and you're able to leave your ISO on the auto setting, that will help adjust for brightness. But lots of times, you'll have to bring the exposure down even more. And that's when ND filters come into effect. And ND stands for neutral density. And it's basically putting sunglasses over the sensor of your camera to darken things down a little bit and bring the exposure to where it needs to be. And honestly, this just involves a lot of futzing about. You gotta go out in the woods. Hopefully the light around you stays pretty even. And then that way you can try these different ND filters on your cameras, decide which one works best, set in the manual settings, and see what happens. The other way to kind of force that shutter speed lower down is to film in darker areas or just wait till the light level is lower, kind of like how it is right now. These conditions right now would actually be great for filming some slower shutter speed, more motion blurry kind of footage. And this is what I do a lot of the times when I'm filming for this channel. I'll try and wait for later in the day to go and film. One, when the sun is out, the light is really nice and low and everything looks beautiful. But then two, I try and time it so that when I'm filming the really fast stuff on my trip, the light levels are kind of like this, and the camera will bring those shutter speeds down lower, which induces that motion blur, and it just gives that little bit more sense of speed. You got all that? Okay, good. It's the final phase now. It's the final step. It's time to ramp everything up to 11 and force as much peripheral speed into your shot as humanly possible. Because we know that if there are things whipping past us really, really close to us, make things look faster, then if we can add as many of those things like trees and shrubs and hills and all those kinds of things as possible, then things are going into like warp speed territory. So if filming crazy looking POV footage is your game, then go and search out really, really fast trails or situations that are very, very tight. So they have trees and rocks and things right close to you. Or as you can see in this footage from Isaiah, combining that motion blur and really fast gully trails. Well, there you go. Level 1, 2, and 3 for making your action camera footage look as fast as it felt. Hey, if you found the video helpful, hit the like button. Apparently that helps bring it out to more people who are looking for the same thing. And we've got some more stuff coming up like this, so subscribe if you want to see more, including a video on how I actually make my action camera footage look and sound really good on the back end in my video editor. And yes, that even includes making your footage look good on Instagram. Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody. Cheers.